The morning air was crisp, the kind that carried a quiet promise of peace. I had just finished signing a check to deposit when Leander caught up with me outside the Bancroft Savings Branch. His voice was too smooth, too practiced, as he leaned against the brick wall. "Mother, it's a small loan. Just need you to co-sign. Nothing more." I had heard that phrase before. Nothing more. It always grew into something larger. I folded my hands together, steadying myself. "Leander, I cannot. I won't jeopardize my house or my savings." His smile slipped, replaced by a flicker of panic. "It's just a formality. You'll never have to pay a cent." I shook my head. More firmly this time. The quiet between us thickened. Then, without warning, his hand came across my cheek with a sharp crack. The world narrowed to the sting blooming across my face. "Don't act like you're the victim," Seraphine's voice cut in. Flat and cold. She stood a few steps away, arms folded, her eyes hard as glass. A couple leaving the bank glanced over but quickly looked away, pretending to be busy with their receipts. The silence of strangers felt worse than the slap itself. I touched my cheek, refusing to let tears fall. My son's face was flushed, his chest rising and falling like a cornered animal. I stepped past him, forcing my legs to move toward the glass doors. Inside, the scent of coffee and polish wrapped around me. Familiar, yet suddenly alien. The teller's chatter hummed in the background. Behind a desk, Harold Pike, the branch officer, rose when he saw me. His kind eyes lingered on my cheek, then shifted uneasily to the lobby where Leander and Seraphine lingered. "Mrs. Lark," he said carefully, lowering his voice, "I need to show you something. There are documents here that concern me." My fingers tightened around the strap of my handbag as I followed him toward his office, my pulse quickening with every step. Harold closed the office door behind us, his expression taut. He laid a folder on the polished desk and slid it toward me with both hands, as though it carried something dangerous. "Mrs. Lark, this came through last week. I wanted to verify it with you directly." I opened the folder. My own name looped across the page. Neat cursive on a loan agreement for $20,000. The signature looked familiar, yet it wasn't mine. My stomach turned cold. "That's not me," I whispered, pressing my fingers to the paper. "I was in Charleston that entire week. A cardiology appointment. I still have the receipts." The door burst open before Harold could reply. Leander stepped inside, Seraphine at his shoulder. "Mother, you did sign it. You just don't remember. We went over it after dinner." My throat tightened. "I did not. I was 200 miles away." He gave a short, nervous laugh. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Harold's gaze flicked between us, the tension coiling like a rope pulled too tight. "This is serious. We can't process this without clarification. Given the irregularities, I'll have to escalate." Within the hour, I found myself sitting before Judge Marla Ellison in a small hearing room. The folder spread across her desk. She adjusted her glasses, skimmed the pages, then looked directly at me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, in a low voice, she leaned closer. "You need a lawyer." The words landed heavier than any gavel. My pulse thundered in my ears as I gathered my purse. My legs felt unsteady as I stood, the carpet shifting beneath me. Outside, Leander muttered to Seraphine, their whispers sharp and hurried. I didn't wait to hear the rest. My hands trembled as I pushed open the courthouse doors. The late sunlight too bright, the air too thin. This wasn't confusion or some clerical mistake. It was deliberate, and it was only the beginning. On the ride home, the phrase that had followed me for decades echoed in my mind, "Family helps family." It had been my late husband's favorite saying, and I had carried it like a banner after he passed. Yet the truth was, Bitterer help only seemed to move one direction. I remembered the day I sold Henry's woodworking tools. The smell of cedar and varnish still lingered in the garage. Even as I polished each piece to prepare for the buyer, Leander needed money to launch his landscaping company. And I told myself Henry would have wanted me to give his son a fair start. The cash barely covered a used truck and a second-hand mower, but I handed it over without question. Then came Seraphine's tuition, a certification program in hospitality management that promised career advancement. She stood in my kitchen with wide eyes. Speaking about ambition and opportunity, I wrote the check from my savings account, proud to see her excitement. Later, I discovered she never finished the program. The refrain had been used again and again, pressed into me like a stamp. Family helps family. Only now did I see it had become a command, not a choice. That evening, I walked next door to Ronan Greer's bungalow. He had once been a detective, long retired now, though the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled. I sat at his table with a cup of strong coffee and told him everything: Harold's folder, the forged signature, Judge Ellison's warning. Ronan leaned back, his chair creaking. You need to start a file. Dates, receipts, every scrap of paper. Don't trust memory alone. His voice was calm, deliberate. Then he added, almost gently, sometimes love turns into leverage. People push hardest against the ones they know will bend. I swallowed hard, because he was right. I had bent so many times I no longer recognized where my own spine began. I promised him I'd begin gathering documents, even as a knot of dread formed in my stomach. The first place I would need to look was my mailbox. 2 days later, I sat across from Mara Quinn in her downtown office, a wall of law books behind her and a fountain pen twirling between her fingers. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Ronan had called in a favor, and she agreed to meet me without retainer until she'd seen the scope of my problem. She pulled a blue folder from her briefcase and spread its contents across the polished table. These are your credit reports, she said. 3 bureaus. Verified last night. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. Column after column of debt stared back at me. $82,000, she read aloud, tapping the summary. 2 loans, 1 maxed store card. And her pen paused. A home improvement lien against your bungalow. The room tilted. They tried to use my house. Mara's tone stayed even. That's what the record shows. But here's where they slipped. She pulled a highlighted document forward. Your bungalow isn't in your personal name. Years ago, you and your late husband placed it in a revocable trust. And the trust includes a no encumbrance clause. I blinked at her, meaning any lien filed against it is void. The house cannot be leveraged without your express consent, which you did not give. She met my gaze. That void is your shield, Mrs. Lark, but we need to wield it carefully. If we show our hand too early, they'll scramble. If we wait too long, they'll burrow deeper. I exhaled, a strange mix of relief and fury coursing through me. They had aimed for my home, the one place I thought untouchable, and yet the foresight of Henry's planning had protected me. Mara gathered the papers into a neat stack. Our next step is to trace how they managed to intercept your accounts. Fraud of this scale usually leaves a paper trail. Her words rang in my ears as I left the office. By the time I reached my porch, I already knew where I had to begin the mailbox that had betrayed me. The next morning, I stood at the counter of Bancroft's post office, my palms damp against the cool surface. I had asked for a review of my mail delivery, convinced something wasn't right. The clerk typed briskly, then frowned at her screen. Mrs. Lark, according to our system, your billing statements have been redirected for the past 6 months. P.O. Box 1147. I stared at her, my mouth dry. I never set that up. Her eyes softened with discomfort. It was registered by Seraphine Lark. The room seemed to lurch. All those days when bills never arrived, when I thought perhaps the bank was moving to paperless statements without notice, it hadn't been oversight. It had been theft in plain sight. I called Ronan, my voice shaking. He arrived within 20 minutes, hat pulled low, determination written across his lined face. Together. We requested surveillance footage from the postmaster. It took a few days, but when Ronan finally slid the grainy photographs across my kitchen table, I nearly retched. There was Seraphine, hair tied in a neat scarf, sunglasses perched on her nose. She cradled armfuls of envelopes, week after week. Her mouth curved in a satisfied half-smile. She knew what she was looking for, Ronan said quietly. Credit card statements, bank letters, anything that could give them leverage. My stomach churned. They hadn't just forged my name. They had intercepted my life, siphoning every detail with the precision of a hawk circling prey. Suddenly, their odd questions about my doctor, visits the cardiology scan in Charleston, the physical therapy last winter snapped into focus. Those weren't expressions of concern. They were reconnaissance missions. Opportunities to know when I was absent, and my mailbox left unguarded. I pressed both hands flat against the table, fighting the nausea that rose in waves. Every kindness, every check I had written, now looked like stepping stones leading straight into their trap. I lifted my head to Ronan, my voice steadier than I felt. If they're willing to reroute my mail, they won't stop here. We need to be ready. Sunday morning, I walked into St. Helena's with my head high, though I could already sense the shift in the air. Conversations hushed when I passed. Seraphine stood near the front, her hands clasped, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Pray for my poor mother-in-law," she said, her eyes glistening. "She's confused about money matters, and it's breaking our family apart." A murmur spread through the pews. Pity aimed not at me, but at the picture she painted. I felt eyes on the back of my coat, whispers sliding between hymnals. Isolation settled on my shoulders, heavier than any winter shawl. I made it through the service, but the silence that greeted me afterward was sharper than words. No one asked me to join them for coffee. No one offered a ride home. I drove myself, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. That night, the sound of breaking glass jolted me from bed. I ran to the kitchen to find shards glittering across the floor, cold air rushing in through the shattered window. On the wall above the sink, in dripping red paint, the words screamed, "Family first." The letters dripped like open wounds. Police officers took photographs while I stood with my arms wrapped tight across my chest. One of them muttered about neighborhood kids, but Mara arrived within the hour, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. She took one look at the spray-painted message and shook her head. "This isn't random vandalism," she said. "It's intimidation. We'll push for it to be classified as such." I nodded, though my throat burned with unshed words. If they thought paint and broken glass would silence me, they had miscalculated. 2 nights after the vandalism, Ronan appeared at my door with a cardboard box balanced in his arms. He set it down on my dining table and pulled back the flaps, revealing a dust-coated laptop. "Found this in Leander's old storage unit," he said. "Thought you might want to see what's on it before he realizes it's missing." I hesitated, then pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life, sluggish but determined, the familiar login screen flickering. Ronan guessed the password. Before I did. Leander had used Seraphine's birthday. When the desktop opened, rows of icons cluttered the screen. Ronan pointed to one labeled budget planner. I clicked. A spreadsheet spread across the monitor. color-coded, meticulous. At first glance, it looked like any household budget, but as I scanned the columns, a cold sweat broke across my back. Every payday I'd ever had from the library was marked. My medical appointments, travel dates, even when I visited Charleston, were logged with precision. Besides some entries, chilling notes in block letters. Mail intercepted. Use graduation signature. I covered my mouth with my hand. They had even used the handwriting from my high school graduation card, something Seraphine once admired and tucked away in a keepsake box. My body shook as the realization sank in. It wasn't improvisation. It was premeditated theft of my very identity. Mara arrived not long after, summoned by Ronan's call. She leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowing at the screen. "This isn't sloppy," she said, her voice low and certain. "This is organized conspiracy. With this, we can prove coordination, intent, everything." I nodded, though tears blurred the numbers into meaningless smudges. What broke me wasn't the debt, it was seeing my life reduced to cells and formulas, cataloged like property waiting to be stripped. Mara gently closed the laptop. "This is enough to bring to court. The judge won't dismiss it." I wiped my eyes, my chest heavy but steadier. They had cataloged me like data. Now it was my turn to catalog them as criminals. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust when I stepped inside. My knees trembled, but I forced them steady. Seraphine was already seated at the front, dressed in pale cream, her hair pinned neatly as though for a portrait. When she spoke, her voice broke just enough to sound believable. "My mother-in-law is dramatic," she told the judge. "She's confused, overwhelmed by finances. We only ever tried to help. Her performance might have convinced me years ago. Before I learned how carefully she curated every tear." Mara rose, her voice crisp, unflinching. "Your Honor, these are travel receipts proving Mrs. Lark was in Charleston on the day her supposed signature was filed." She laid the documents neatly on the bench, each page aligned. "This is the trust clause confirming her home cannot be encumbered without consent." And this, Mara opened the laptop. The spreadsheet glowing on the screen is proof of coordination between Leander and Seraphine, with notes referencing intercepted mail and stolen signatures. A clerk testified next, his hands shaking slightly as he admitted to bypassing verification at Seraphine's urging. The gallery stirred with murmurs, the weight of truth rippling through the room. Judge Ellison adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady on me, restraining order extended, all accounts frozen. Immediate steps for credit restoration are ordered. Her gavel struck once, firm and final. The bailiff moved forward. Leander's face drained as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He twisted toward Seraphine, but she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. The judge's voice cut through the tension again. "Mrs. Lark, you are warned. Conspiracy charges remain under review." I exhaled slowly, steadying myself against the swell of emotions. The gavel's echo lingered in my ears, not as judgment, but as a heartbeat reminding me I was still standing outside the courtroom. Mara touched my arm. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. The days after the hearing felt like walking through water, heavy, distorted, every movement slower than it should be. At church, the whispers began before the hymns even started. Some old friends slipped into my pew with quiet apologies, murmuring that they should have believed me sooner. Others avoided my eyes entirely, gathering their coats quickly after the service as if my presence might stain them. The divide cut deep, for every handshake extended, another hand was pulled away. Seraphine wasted no time. Within a week, videos of her appeared online, staged in her kitchen with a mug of tea and perfectly rehearsed tremors in her voice. She spoke about betrayal, about an ungrateful mother-in-law, about her own ruined family. For a while, the comments swelled with sympathy. Then someone leaked the court transcript, and the tide shifted. Screenshots of the spreadsheet, the clerk's testimony. Even the vandalism photos spread faster than her pleas. By the second video, the responses had turned against her. The performance cracked. One evening, Harold Pike knocked at my door. He stood on my porch with his hat in his hands, shoulders heavier than I remembered. "Mrs. Lark," he said, "your ordeal has shaken this bank to its core. We've begun overhauling procedures, signature verification, mail notices. Everything. What you endured should never have been possible." His words humbled me, though I saw the guilt in his eyes. I only nodded, grateful that something good might come from my pain. That night, I sat with an empty notebook, the first page staring back like a challenge. My hand hesitated over the paper, then began to move. At first, it was just dates and receipts, but soon the sentences grew, spilling with memories and the sting of betrayal. Journaling steadied me in a way nothing else had. Weeks passed, and the notebook thickened. It was no longer just evidence, it was my voice, one I hadn't heard clearly in years. And somewhere between those lines, I realized I wasn't writing only for myself. The story would have to be told. 6 months later, I walked through the door of my bungalow with the sun slanting across polished floors, the air lighter than it had been in years. My credit was fully restored. The threatening phone calls had ceased, the accounts frozen and purged. The home Henry and I built remained untouched, anchored safely within the trust he once insisted on. The ripples of the trial had carried me to unexpected shores. Mara, Harold, and I began meeting weekly, first over coffee and then in a rented room at the community center. What started as simple advice sessions for neighbors had blossomed into the Elder Finance Clinic. We guided retirees on fraud prevention, helped widows untangle hidden debts, and taught grandparents how to spot coercion before it stole their dignity. Harold handled the banking reforms, Mara, the legal clinics, and I, surprisingly, found myself teaching from my own hard-earned experience. As for Leander, he entered a restitution program under the watchful eye of the court. I heard from Mara that he had taken a job hauling freight. The paycheck garnished until his debt to me and to the system was repaid. Seraphine pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy, the tears gone from her voice at last. She avoided prison, but not the judgment of those she had once charmed. There was no joy in their downfall, only a quiet finality. My life was not theirs to drain anymore. One evening, I clipped a rose from the bush Henry planted decades ago. Its petals glowed deep crimson in the fading light. Carrying it inside, I placed it in the small glass vase on my windowsill, where the world could see it bloom. They called me dramatic. I whispered to the quiet room. The law called me by my name. I watched the reflection of the rose in the glass, a fragile flame against the dusk, and knew I had signed the only document that mattered: my freedom.